But you're a mean, mad white man. You're a mean, mad white man. Mean, mad white man.
Bari Weiss, in her recent piece in the New York Times, writes, "Meet the renegades of the intellectual dark web. An alliance of heretics is making an end run around the mainstream conversation. Should we be listening? Shitstorms abound on the internets. When this article was published a few weeks ago, intersectional feminists are losing their minds. Social justice warriors are calling everyone alt-right, white supremacists. Again, online articles are popping up attempting to reestablish politically correct dominance over legacy media, a lost cause that has continued slipping into the morass of the regressive left echo chamber." Bari says, "Here are some things that you will hear when you sit down to dinner with the vanguard of the intellectual dark web. There are fundamental biological differences between men and women. Free speech is under siege. Identity politics is a toxic ideology that is tearing American society apart. And we're in a dangerous place if these ideas are considered dark. Today, people like them who dare venture into this there be dragons territory on the intellectual map have met with outrage and derision, even or perhaps especially from people who pride themselves on openness. It's a pattern that has become common in our new era of that which cannot be said, and it is the reason the intellectual dark web, a term coined half-jokingly by Mr. Weinstein, came to exist." She continues, "What is the IDW and who is a member of it? It's hard to explain, which is both its beauty and its danger. Most simply, it is a collection of iconoclastic thinkers, academic renegades, and media personalities who are having a rolling conversation on podcasts, YouTube, and Twitter, and in sold-out auditoriums that sound unlike anything else happening, at least publicly, in the culture right now. Feeling largely locked out of legacy outlets, they are rapidly building their own mass media channels. Bari Weiss goes to great lengths to show us who the people are that inhabit this dark web and the reasons why she believes they are part of it. But what we see from the PC police is one response after another, mischaracterizing Weiss's words and distorting her points to fit their own confused and distorted logic. You see, there is massive butthurt over the success of this bunch, who are far from being at the margins of thought in society, but we keep reading claims that they are crying for being marginalized and shut out of public discourse. Doesn't make sense. Fox makes these claims, which are endlessly being parroted by the regressive left on social media sites. The intellectual dark web explained. What Jordan Peterson has in common with the alt-right. A controversial New York Times article describes several popular white intellectuals as marginalized renegades. Some assertions in the piece deserve the ridicule, but Weiss accurately captured a genuine perception among the people she is writing about, and perhaps for. They do feel isolated and marginalized, and with some justification. However, the reasons are quite different from those suggested by Weiss. She asserts that they have been marginalized because of their willingness to take on all topics and their determination not to parrot what's politically convenient. The truth is rather that dark web intellectuals like Donald Trump supporters and the online alt-right have experienced a sharp decline in their relative status over time. This is leading them to frustration and resentment. First and most important is this notion Bari Weiss has claimed these people as being marginalized, a word repeated several times in the Vox hit piece. Weiss never mentions marginalization, but you will find that the ninnies on the internets have bounced this sentiment through a long echo chamber as if it is reality. But there is more. Henry Farrell at Vox attempts to paint a list of people into the alt-right corner. Never mind that many listed in the New York Times piece were Occupy Wall Street or Bernie Sanders supporters or voted for Hillary Clinton. No, it's much easier to dismiss your adversary as being an ugly monster associated with a group of people that are easy for many to despise. But take for a moment this claim that the intellectual dark web denizens are not only marginalized, but, and this is important, they and I quote from Vox, have experienced a sharp decline in their relative status over time. Since Jordan Peterson has become the new favorite target of the control left, one thing that is often pointed out by his detractors and haters is his success. From another New York Times article, he is also very successful. His book, 12 Rules for Life, which was published in January, has sold more than 1.1 million copies. Thanks to his YouTube channel, he makes more than $80,000 a month just on donations. Hundreds of thousands of people have taken his online personality test and self-improvement writing exercises. The media covers him relentlessly. Contrary to the Vox hack piece that attempts to create reality out of their fantasy that these people are marginalized, conjures up images of former university professors begging for change at subway stations. Most haters of this new movement make it abundantly clear that it is their success that is problematic. Dave Rubin and his wildly successful YouTube enterprise, Brett Weinstein and Heather Heying, both forced out of the insanity of Evergreen College, now national heroes. Sam Harris with best-selling books and worldwide speaking tours. The list goes on. Just a few days after the Weiss piece in the New York Times was published, Andrew Sweeney on Medium has a different perspective than the control left echo chamber. He proclaims the intellectual dark web is dead. The intellectual dark web died as soon as it was baptized by the New York Times, and I don't believe its death is something to be mourned. That is not to criticize its members, who are all lively, brilliant people, only there is a problem with the label. The anti-tribalism that the IDW represents, a new kind of tribalism or groupthink. This is nobody's fault. The same thing always happens when movements become too self-conscious. But I'm afraid the intellectual dark web is being criticized for a good reason. Those associated with it should not be defensive of the label, but disidentify with it. What I believe Sweeney is telling us is that once the loose collective of people identify as being in the dark web are organized as a group or tribe, they are no longer renegades but more status quo. Unfortunately for this theory, those mentioned in Weiss's article are not as cohesive a tribe as he would have us believe. It's like the trend of condemning atheists as a group for some kind of tribalism and, as he puts it, groupthink. The only thing atheists have in common is a conclusion that no gods exist. There is no manifesto that the secular tribe identifies with. The same is with the people described by Barry Weiss. The core members have little in common politically, but they all share three distinct qualities. First, they are willing to disagree ferociously, but talk civilly about nearly every meaningful subject: religion, abortion, immigration, the nature of consciousness. Second, in an age which popular feelings about the way things ought to be often override facts about the way things actually are, each is determined to resist parroting what's politically convenient. And third, some have paid for this commitment by being purged from institutions that have become increasingly hostile to unorthodox thought and have found receptive audiences elsewhere. Quoting again from her column, Dave Rubin says, "If this thing becomes something massive, a political or social movement, then maybe we'd need to have some statement of principles. For now, we're just a crew of people trying to have the kind of important conversations that the mainstream won't." But to be fair to Sweeney at Medium, isn't pessimistic about this movement. The early excitement of this group was that they facilitated intelligent conversations between people whose views are diverse and not ideologically possessed. They help collapse polarities. These conversations have been illuminating for a lot of people, certainly. Even if he thinks the movement is moribund, he concludes with an upbeat vision. In any case, let us not mourn its death, but rather find an alternative, intellectual but also spiritual dark web. The mission of the IDW has always been to shun group identity politics anyway. A real dark web or secret path or hidden community of like-minded souls will never be mainstream, but it can make a great, though often an invisible, difference. Getting back to the Vox hit piece, Farrell pushes the narrative of guilt by association of the dark webbers with the hard alt-right by conflating the noble concept of listening to diverse viewpoints with people that he considers alt-right, and indeed a few of them are. This creates a veneer of disrepute to people who are, as Sweeney points out at Medium, pretty much in the mainstream, which is why he's saying the dark web is dead. But we've entered the world of a strange binary, good or evil, friend or enemy. If you're not on my side, you are deplorable and your opinions are not worthy of debate. Evidence of this has been shown in the last several years, seeing events and speakers shut down for being heretics, professors and prominent people now guilty of thought crimes. The concept of words equal violence. Therefore, the only remedy to your words is violence. Farrell accurately quotes Weiss's description that the dark web intellectuals are committed to the belief that setting up no-go zones and no-go people is inherently corrupting to free thought. Farrell connects the dots between the dark web meanies and the electoral victory of Donald Trump. However, intellectual openness is not the only possible reason the dark web is flirting with the dark enlightenment, as he calls it. Recent political science research suggests that Trump's popularity in the 2016 presidential election was based on status threat. Members of high status groups that had lost prestige were more likely to be receptive to Trump's rhetoric. I won't risk walking the plank by disagreeing with Farrell to some extent. He may be right on this point, but what he's not going to reveal to you is that many on the left and right believe that the hysterics from the regressive left leading up to the 2016 election might have played a large role in Clinton's loss. This new tactic of branding anyone to the right of Michael Moore as alt-right fascists or Nazis, I believe, had a significant role to play in that election. The long list of phobias peddled by the intersectional feminists, the role of identity politics in attempting to shame people for the color of their skin or their sex. This recent campaign that's being pushed of white guilt and toxic masculinity certainly played some part, no matter how small, in pissing people off. Are there racists and misogynists running around society? The answer is yes. If you see one, say or think something, or do something. It's another thing to accuse all white males of being terrible people. Accusing them of having original sin doesn't play well with honest, ordinary folk. We keep hearing that Trump won via the Electoral College in a few states by a mere 80,000 votes. Considering millions voted that year, it's not hard to believe that a few tens of thousands of minds were changed by the insults hurled at them because of the accident of birth. John McWhorter has an interesting article published on the American Interest where he compares this new movement of white shame to original sin of Christianity. This brand of self-flagellation has become the new form of enlightenment on race issues. It qualifies as a kind of worship. The parallels with Christianity are almost uncannily rich. White privilege is the secular white person's original sin, present at birth and ultimately ineradicable. One does one's penance by endlessly attesting to this privilege in hope of some kind of forgiveness. McWhorter writes about his own experiences with race in America, with decades of improvement in how we see each other as people. But this is not enough for the identity politics team. There are some that see the U.S. as not having made progress on the issue of race since the antebellum South. McWhorter, like most people who show signs of consciousness, realize that we are light years away from the overt racism of yesteryear. He concludes with, "We have gone from most whites being unaware that racism was a problem for black people at all to whites being chilled to their bones at the possibility of harboring racism in their souls, terrified at the prospect of being singled out as a heretic and forgetting that the indulgences they purchase and the praying they do for their souls has more to do with them than with anyone black and their problems. This is a white America in which the message has become garbled." Anyway, buckle your seatbelt, because if you think the Vox hit piece was something, then we're going on a long ride into fantasy land hostility towards the intellectual dark web's clinical psychologist Jordan Peterson. When it comes to journalism, James Felt, if you can call it writing, on bodyforwife.com barely qualifies his opinion. I don't take issue with Felt having little journalistic integrity, because an opinion piece is just fine. However, his offering is so hackneyed as to contain no original thoughts other than to show that he is an unabashed axe grinder with Jordan Peterson and the IDW sharply in his dull sights. He says, Jordan Peterson, ugh, just fuck this guy. And by the way, I mean, no one should ever fuck this guy, especially now he's gone full male supremacist, spewing some enforced monogamy bullshit because he thinks the way to stop violent attacks is to ensure equality of access to vaginas via societal pressure to slut-shame women into becoming a man's sexual property. I'm not going to give this guy much attention here. However, if you want to read his massive screed against Jordan Peterson, basically parroting all the online tripe written about him, I have links to all sources in the description. I must admit that Peterson having such a massive public and online presence give ample opportunity for vicious quote mining to enable the extreme left to easily and sincerely reduce his thoughts to simple bumper sticker slogans. Fell poorly attempts to paint Peterson into a corner. The labeling tactic of the regressive left has been working well for them. Peterson is an MRA, therefore he is evil. But people are onto this and it's falling on deaf ears. Or is it? Eric Levitz, writing for New York Intelligencer, is apparently buying into it. Hook, line, and sinker, so much so that he uses the tactic of the very people he condemns, attempting poorly, I must add, to paint your opponent, here, Jordan Peterson, as the exact opposite to what they are, oddly trying to depict Peterson not as a foe of communism, but as a Marxist enabler and fellow traveler. Anyone having followed the career of Jordan Peterson for only 5 minutes would laugh at what this corp has to say. Jordan Peterson does not support equality of opportunity. Well then, imagine that. He doesn't support equality of opportunity. We know the radicals in the identity politics movement will believe whatever they are virtue signaled to, but this one is pushing the bar to the point even the blue-haired SJWs are probably scratching their pointed heads over. Levitt starts by quoting stats on the disparities of incomes between the top tier and the lowest 90%. And North America's most influential public intellectual has convinced himself that one of our society's biggest problems is its excessive intolerance for inequality. He is compelled to admit that Peterson is an important intellectual. Kudos for him. Jordan Peterson believes that America is besieged by postmodernists who wish to build an economic system that will guarantee equal outcomes for all individuals. In his book, YouTube videos, lectures, and newspaper interviews, the Canadian psychologist turned patron saint of failsons, I'm surprised he didn't use the word lumpen, decries the notion that justice requires total economic equality with such fervor and frequency you'd think he was speaking from a Stalinist gulag. Here's where he loses me. Aside from his awkward attempts to use metaphor to associate Peterson with Marxism, without realizing it, Levitz has confused equality of outcome with equality of opportunity. Not a big surprise in an obviously naked hit piece. And yet, he is far from alone in this fixation. His fellow travelers, once again the bizarre use of an incorrectly loaded term in the so-called intellectual dark web, also believe that it is extremely important and incredibly brave to say that full communism is a bad idea in Donald Trump's United States. Hardly controversial. Ben Shapiro, Joe Rogan, and just about every other prominent critic of social justice warriors regularly decry the left for abandoning the American ideal of equality of opportunity for the Marxist dream of equality of outcomes. Game, set, and match for Peterson. You've basically made his point for him. And in short, this is what he is saying. I'm not going to quote Peterson, but give my thoughts on this. There is a huge chasm of wealth that separates the top percentage of people in the U.S. from the bottom 90+%. This is rarely contested by anyone. However, what I think Peterson might be saying about remedy to economic inequality is not an issue of equity, but the concept of forced equity. How does this work? Using intersectional logic, if we divide people into smaller and smaller groups, it follows that we end up with an infinite number of categories or identities. How do you decide, and more importantly, who gets to decide what group or combinations of groups are to receive compensation in order to have economic parity, and who will be the ones being taken from? More to the point, what will be the metrics used in determining equity? And there's more. Is economics the only playing field to be leveled? I want to use one example out of many to make a point of the pointlessness of the goals of those advocating for equality of outcome. Let's take a career like an airplane pilot. You can choose any example you like, doctors, auto mechanics, whatever. But think of a job that is important in many ways, like the safety of the public. You are looking for the best candidate for the job, not only their knowledge and experience, but their ability to safely take off and land a jet, in the case of a pilot. People's lives are directly impacted by this. If you have, let's pick a number, 10 positions to fill, and 10 white men who are highly qualified with a proven safety track record apply, we're not going to automatically hire them. We need to look at non-white men and women. Let's say, for the sake of argument, we have another 10 people, women and blacks, and a few other categories you want to throw in, who are unable to fly a plane and or have poor safety records. Are we to pass over some of the 10 highly qualified white men in order to fill an arbitrary quota? You'd say I was insane for suggesting it. Now, this is a hypothetical situation, and in reality, there wouldn't likely be highly unqualified candidates even being considered for a critical position like flying a jet. But in the world of equality of outcome, it would have to be in play. Do we hire the most qualified, or should we use some system of hiring that guarantees the outcome? What Peterson is strongly advocating is the equal opportunity for all, so that the 10 most qualified people would be chosen. Those 10 may be 10 black women, if they are indeed the best pick. This is what he stands for. But we live in an imperfect world, and there are times when people are unfairly passed over for opportunity. And Peterson even addresses this. He argues the remedy of equality of outcome proposed is arbitrary and destructive. Levitt takes issue with Ben Shapiro arguing that the United States is not a racist country, which it isn't. Does racism exist? It exists everywhere. But we are fundamentally a country with a system of rule of law, each person being equal in its eyes. Levitt says, Peterson meanwhile believes that the following argument constitutes a bulletproof case that economic inequalities in the United States are almost entirely meritocratic. Let's say you want to determine what the best predictors are for lifetime success in a Western society. Well, what would you hope for? How about intelligence? There would be a good one. Let's hope the smart people occupy more positions of complexity, right? Because they're smarter. Would you want it any other way? The number one predictor of accomplishment in Western societies is intelligence. What's the number two predictor? Conscientiousness. Well, what's that? It's a trait marker for hard work. So who gets ahead? Smart people who work hard. That the socioeconomic conditions a person is born into could limit her opportunity to develop such traits never seems to cross Peterson's mind. That the genetic factor which could affect every person on the planet never seems to enter Levitt's mind. What Levitt is suggesting is that there are people who do not have the capacity for intelligence is itself bigoted or racist. What is more poignant is the notion that conscientiousness is so lacking in some parts of society that there are more than one class of people. In Peterson's world, as well as the rest of the sane one we want to live in, conscientiousness is something we all have. We'll end this part of the video about Levitt's hit piece with a comical note. He says, and I quote, I do not know any feminist who blamed the patriarchy for the fact that no women has ever played middle linebacker in the NFL. Someone needs to get outdoors more, I think. It appears that not everyone on the political or cultural left is hysterical about the intellectual dark web or Jordan Peterson. Just last week, Carol Horton, writing for Quillette about this new Peterson phenomena. Jordan Peterson and the failure of the left. If you follow the news stream, it seems that virtually every right-thinking, left-leaning, pun intended, journalist, blogger, and social media maven agrees. Peterson is an alt-right wolf in professorial sheep's clothing, a self-serving charlatan who dresses up old-school misogyny, racism, and elitism in faux intellectual, fascist, mystical garb. I don't buy it. I've read and listened to enough Peterson to make up my own mind, and that's not how I see him at all. Rather than being forthright about this, though, I've tended to cower silently in my alienated corner, fearful that revealing my rejection of the stock anti-Peterson narrative will cause my progressive friends to denounce me and the social media mobs to swarm. This is coming from the woman that is the author of the book, Race and Making of American Liberalism. She is no Sean Hannity or Alex Jones. Carol Horton is a bona fide real left liberal. She says, it's not that I'm an uncritical Peterson devotee, although I find both his work and the furor surrounding him quite fascinating. I don't share his way of thinking about the political issues such as socioeconomic inequality, that most concern me at all. That said, I would never look to someone like him, who I see as a classical conservative, to provide thought leadership on such matters. That's the role of the left, and in my view, the left is doing an abysmal job on that front. Horton continues with a note of concern to where the progressive left is heading. The hyperbolic uniformity of the leftist attack on Peterson is emblematic of the growing tendency to reduce left-of-center thought to the status of rigidly simplistic ideology. Increasingly, what passes for progressive political thought today offers little more than a scripted set of weaponized hashtags. You must be pro-Me Too and anti-patriarchy, no further thought required. This narrowing of our public discourse is disturbing and worrisome on multiple mutually reinforcing levels. Some of the viewers of this video aren't going to be happy with me saying this, but for many years, I considered people from the conservative political and cultural right to be zombies that marched in lockstep to a single ideology. Stay with me. If you dared to step out of line or even did the unthinkable, that is to nuance a particular idea, then you were cast off as a heretic. I thought of most religious people this way too. Obviously, it's not fair to lump people into some common trash heap, as each person, big surprise here, is fully capable of their own thoughts and opinions. But here I am thinking the same thing of the authoritarian left. What people like Carol Horton are pointing out, and from the perspective of someone on the left, is that there is this herd mentality, this new inability to question the intersexual left's doctrine. First, it's unconvincing to everyone who's not some sort of true believer or faithful follower. No doubt I'm the only person who's wondered what all the fuss is about. Decided to take the time to listen to one of Peterson's YouTube lectures and come away feeling that the left's commentariat is trying to sell me a fake bill of goods. The gap between Peterson's obvious intelligence and the left's scathing denunciation of him as an alt-right idiot is simply too large for many of us to ignore. Second, the left's attack on Peterson is so unrelenting, so superficial, and quite frequently so vicious that many of us who work and or live in left-leaning social environments feel scared to speak up against it. We don't want to alienate our friends, damage our professional reputations, or attract the attention of fire-breathing activists. Horton has a genuine fear of being cast out as a heretic and declared to be a witch by the control left. Responding to the identity politics chorus that Jordan Peterson is stupid, she writes, although Peterson's professional work is rooted in the study of Jungian psychology rather than political philosophy, his worldview fits quite well into this tradition of conservative political thought. For example, Peterson is concerned with how postmodern anti-foundationalism undercuts long-standing cultural norms. He sees the social justice left as filling the resulting vacuum with shallow anti-oppression platitudes. He believes that human existence is inevitably full of suffering and that it's not easy to chart an ethical course through life. The upside is that the struggle to do so provides a vital sense of meaning and purpose. These are not stupid concerns. What Carol Horton is willing to do, that is, listen to ideas that come into conflict with her own and gain some appreciation for what others actually think, something I thought was the hallmark of the progressive left, now is labeled as some crypto-fascist open exchange of ideas, or the deplorable concept of viewpoint diversity, the no man's land that extreme leftists dare not enter. I realize that Peterson has at times said things that I disagree with and might even find offensive, but I'm much more concerned with and disgusted by the endless stream of tendacious and dishonest articles from leftist critics that grab onto such statements and blow them out of proportion, while aggressively erasing everything else the man has ever said or done from the record. I find it even more aggravating that such distortion is typically coupled with a predictable string of gratuitous insults. Peterson is a misogynist, a racist, a transphobe, and so on. And then there's the self-righteous hand-waving towards some grandiose yet utterly vague political project, abolish patriarchy. If I didn't have a long-standing commitment to equalitarian politics, I'd be so turned off by these dynamics that I'd want nothing more to do with the left whatsoever. Horton concludes with, if we hope to see a better future, the left needs to break out of its increasingly stultifying discursive box, stop denouncing everyone who won't dutifully recite the latest list of hashtag slogans as alt-right, and open up to the possibility of a new paradigm. Nicholas Morin at the Inquisitor tells us, the left is afraid of Jordan Peterson, and here's why. Dr. Jordan Peterson scares the left because they cannot scare him, nor can they control, shame, or silence his followers. Given that these tactics have been used to create and maintain an echo chamber of discourse in academia and the popular news media for some time, the rising star of a man who can throw off these chains and show others how to do the same has got to be abjectly terrifying. What scares his detractors is the man Jordan Peterson actually is, not the monster they claim him to be. Yes, they are frightened. Jordan Peterson and those associated with this intellectual dark web are doing what they themselves feel is moral or correct or just the right thing to do. Are they doing the right thing? It's very possible, but what is important is that they are doing what they believe is right. And that scares the regressives. The intersexual left fears them because they can't be cowered into blindly following a narrative that they have created. Every time a courageous person stands up to speak their mind, people hear them, and their numbers grow. For every poor slob that is beaten into submission, there may be another Lindsay Shepherd that appears from the ashes. The authoritarian leftists are the 21st century version of the Spanish Inquisition. They follow in the footsteps of Thomas de Torquemada. Their goal is to bend everyone to their vision of reality. All must follow their orthodoxy. Their tactics are to destroy people, their careers or lives if they dare to speak out against their new religion. What are you going to do, I ask?
Goodbye.